The hospital smelled of antiseptic and the faint tints of recycled air. Sterile environment that was meant to comfort patients, but only served to remind Daniel Cross of battlefield infirmaries. He sat hunched over in the waiting room, his broad shoulders curving forward as if the weight of the galaxy rested there. In a way, it did. On the gurney beside him lay his daughter, Emily. She was only 8 years old, her dark hair matted to her forehead with sweat, her breath shallow and irregular. Each rise and fall of her chest was a battle. And Daniel, once a soldier who had never retreated, felt utterly powerless watching her struggle. He had faced horrors most humans would never even imagine. On Karsus 4, he had fought through streets choked with alien spores that melted flesh on contact. On the frontier of the Threx War, he had held the line against waves of insectoid warriors until his rifle barrel glowed red. His arms bore scars from plasma burns. His legs carried shrapnel from a dozen worlds. But none of it mattered now. His little girl was dying. The enemy wasn't a hostile alien empire. It was bureaucracy. He had pleaded with the doctors, demanded they take Emily into surgery. The diagnosis was clear: a congenital heart defect that had suddenly worsened. She needed a complex, higher-risk operation, and she needed it within hours. Without it, her heart would fail. Yet when he went to the admissions desk, medals and history meant nothing. "I'm sorry, sir," said the administrator, a woman in a crisp white coat, with the detached air of someone who had recited these words too many times. She didn't even look him in the eye, her focus fixed on the glowing datapad in her hands. "The surgery is reserved for Class A insurance holders only. Without proof of coverage, we cannot proceed." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenching until his knuckles whitened. "I can pay," he growled, his voice low, rough from years of command. "I'll sell everything. My house, my land, my pension, whatever it takes. Just save her." The administrator shook her head, her expression never shifting from polite indifference. "Policy is policy, sir. The hospital board is very clear. If we make exceptions for one, we must make them for all. Please step aside for paying patients." It was like being shot without a weapon in his hands. Daniel stared at her, his throat dry, 1,000 furious words threatening to burst free. But what good would they do? He could storm alien trenches, but he couldn't storm an institution built on profit. Emily stirred weakly, her small hand twitching as if reaching for him. He dropped to his knees beside her, clutching her tiny fingers in his calloused hands. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. "I'm tired." His heart shattered. She was only a child, his child, and yet she already sounded like a soldier on her deathbed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead, fighting the tears that burned behind his eyes. He had taught her to be brave, to smile even when things were hard. But now he felt like the coward, helpless before something as absurd as paperwork. Other families passed through the waiting room. A wealthy-looking couple in silken coats walked by with their son, who was already being prepped for minor surgery. Daniel caught snippets of their conversation, complaints about the parking garage, the lack of premium seating in the waiting area. Their child was healthy, alive, and would be treated before Emily because they had the right papers, the right credits. The injustice made Daniel's hands shake. He had fought for this world, for these people. He had bled in silence so that Earth could remain a shining capital of the Federation, safe and prosperous. And in return, when he asked for the bare minimum for the life of his daughter, he was denied. The betrayal was a knife in his gut. Twisting deeper with every beep of Emily's weakening monitor, Daniel pulled his chair close to her gurney, his large frame shielding her from the cold stares of passing staff. His hand went to his pocket, fingers brushing against a worn, battered comms unit. It wasn't standard issue anymore. It was old military tech patched together with tape and grit. There was one number burned into its circuits, a secure channel he had sworn never to use. He had promised himself he would never abuse that connection, not after everything that had happened, not after everything it meant. But this was different. This wasn't about him. It was about Emily. His thumb hovered over the activation key, trembling. He remembered the words once spoken to him by the man on the other end. "If you ever call me." "Daniel, it means the world has ended." Are you ready for that? Tears blurred his vision as he looked at his daughter, pale and fragile on the gurney. She was his whole world. If losing her wasn't the end, what was? Daniel drew a ragged breath, pressed the button, and waited as the signal connected. The signal took longer to connect than Daniel expected. The comms unit buzzed faintly in his hand, the old circuit struggling to bridge the encrypted channel that had lain dormant for nearly a decade. For a moment, he thought maybe the connection was dead, that the number he had been holding on to for so long was nothing but a ghost of the past. Then the static cleared, and a voice, calm and low, filled the silence. Captain Cross. Daniel froze, his chest tightening. It was a voice that could command entire fleets into battle with a single word. A voice he hadn't heard since the wars ended. Even after all these years, it still carried that edge-controlled, precise, terrifyingly powerful. You swore you'd never call me. The tone sharpened, though it was not anger he heard, but something far heavier. A dangerous curiosity. Has it come to this? Daniel's throat felt dry. He swallowed hard, fighting to keep his composure, but his voice cracked anyway. "It's Emily," he said, glancing down at his daughter. Her small form lay so still on the gurney. The machine at her side beeped sluggishly, each tone a cruel reminder that time was slipping away. They won't treat her. The hospital. They're letting her die. For a long moment there was no reply, only the faint hiss of the secure channel, as though the universe itself held its breath. Daniel's hands shook as he held the cum. Had he made a mistake? Would even this man, this legend, tell him there was nothing to be done? Then the voice returned colder than before. Not a chill of indifference, but the lethal frost of wrath being contained. Which hospital? Daniel gave the name, almost whispering it, as if saying it too loud would make the shame heavier. The voice on the other end grew razor-sharp. Understood. Daniel blinked. Wait till the voice cut him off. Hold fast. Stay with your daughter. Help is already moving. And then the line went dead. Daniel lowered the cum slowly, staring at the black screen. His heart thundered in his chest. He knew what those words meant, even if no promise had been spoken. That man didn't waste words. If he said help was coming, then the full weight of the Federation would come crashing down. Still, doubt gnawed at him. He had been just a captain, one of thousands. Why would the Supreme Commander of the Terran Federation fleet answer his call? Why would a man who commanded armadas across galaxies care about the daughter of a retired soldier? He didn't know. All he knew was that the man owed him nothing, and yet had answered anyway. Emily stirred beside him, her lips moving faintly. Daniel bent down, his ear close to her fragile voice. Who was it, Daddy? He squeezed her hand gently, blinking back tears. An old friend, sweetheart? The kind of friend who never breaks a promise? Round them, the hospital carried on in sterile indifference. Nurses walked past without a glance. Doctors hurried between patients with datapads in hand. The administrator, who had denied them earlier, sat at her desk sipping tea, as if she hadn't just signed a death sentence for a little girl, but Daniel's gaze never left. Emily. He remembered battlefields where he and his comrades had called for reinforcements, their positions overrun. He remembered the sinking feeling when command told them, no backup available. They had been left to die more times than he could count. But today was different. Today, backup was coming. Unseen to everyone in the hospital, the storm was already forming. Secure channels had lit up across Earth's orbital command. Black armored transports had been rerouted mid-flight. Elite medics were suiting up, their equipment years ahead of anything a civilian hospital could hope to possess. And at the center of it all, a single man, one of the most feared and respected leaders humanity had ever produced, was. Already on the move, Daniel didn't know the details. He didn't need to. All he knew was that he had pulled the trigger on something unstoppable. He kissed Emily's forehead gently and whispered, Hold on, baby girl. Just a little longer. Help is coming. And though the hospital remained indifferent, though the staff treated them like shadows, the weight in the air had shifted. Daniel could feel it deep in his bones, the way he used to feel enemy artillery strikes before they landed. Something immense was approaching, And when it arrived, nothing would remain the same. The hospital's chief surgeon, Dr. Marcus Yule, prided himself on running one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the Terran capital. Everything was scheduled, ordered, and profitable. Patients came and went like entries on a balance sheet, their value determined not by their suffering, but by their ability to pay. It had been years since anything had disrupted the smooth rhythm of his career. That morning had begun no differently routine checkups. A meeting with the hospital board about expanding premium suites for wealthy off-worlders, and a light lunch with a pharmaceutical executive. But then his assistant burst into his office without knocking. "Dr. Daga," she stammered, pale as death. "You need to see this." He frowned, irritated. "See what?" "I'm in the middle of reviewing tomorrow's surgical schedule." She only pointed toward the window, her hand trembling. Annoyed, Yule stood and walked over, tugging at the collar of his pristine white coat. What he saw made his legs go weak. A fleet of black armored transports had rolled up to the hospital entrance. They weren't civilian vehicles. They moved with military precision, engines humming with a sound that carried weight and menace. Soldiers in midnight armor spilled out, their helmets sleek and angular, their movements too disciplined to be anything but Federation elite. The hospital courtyard, usually filled with shuttles and civilian taxis, now looked like a staging ground for a battlefield. The soldiers fanned out, surrounding the building in perfect formation, every motion deliberate. Civilians scattered in panic, staff members froze mid-step, and whispers of alarm spread like wildfire through the lobby. At their head strode a tall figure draped in a crimson cloak, the fabric catching the sunlight with an almost regal brilliance. His presence was magnetic, suffocating. Even from a distance, Yule recognized him instantly, though part of his mind refused to believe it. "The Supreme Commander," Yule whispered, his mouth dry. His assistant glanced at him in shock. Here, on Earth. It was unthinkable. The Supreme Commander of the Terran Federation fleet hadn't set foot on civilian soil in nearly a decade. His name was spoken with reverence and fear across entire star systems. He commanded armadas capable of reducing planets to ash. His words alone could shift the course of wars. And now, impossibly, he was here at his hospital. The commander moved through the hospital entrance, flanked by armored guards. The automatic doors hissed open. But it felt less like machinery obeying programming and more like the world itself bending to make way. His boots struck the polished floor with measured precision, echoing like thunder in the stunned silence of the lobby. Every nurse, every patient, every bystander froze. Conversations died in throats. Even the ever-present beeping of medical monitors seemed to fade into the background, and then his gaze fell on Dr. Marcus. It was like being caught in the sights of a predator. Those eyes carried the weight of every battlefield, every campaign, every victory humanity had clawed from alien empires. They were not the eyes of a man. They were the eyes of a legend, force of nature wrapped in flesh. The commander's voice was quiet, but it carried across the lobby, as if amplified by the weight of authority itself. "One of my captains called for aid." He stepped forward, his crimson cloak brushing the sterile tiles. "A man who fought in wars so that you and your families could live without fear. He bled for this world. He buried comrades for this flag. And when his child needed help, you denied her." Yule opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat worked uselessly. Every excuse, every justification he might have prepared withered under that gaze. "You denied him because of policy," the commander continued, each word a hammer. "Because profit outweighed honor. Because bureaucracy mattered more than life." The silence in the lobby deepened. Staff shifted nervously. Patients stared in awe. No one dared to interrupt. The commander took another step closer. His presence seemed to fill the air, pressing down on Yule's chest like a physical weight. "Tell me, Dr. Yule, how do you justify letting the daughter of a Terran Federation veteran die for lack of insurance?" The words struck harder than any weapon. The question was not meant to be answered. It was an accusation, a judgment. Yule's knees buckled, the strength draining from his body. He staggered backward, his hands trembling violently. His vision blurred, dark spots creeping in at the edges. And then, the strangled gasp. Dr. Marcus Ewell collapsed to the floor. His body hit the tiles with a thud, and the sound echoed through the silent hall. Gasps rippled through the staff. Nurses rushed forward, not to help the veteran's child, but to attend to their precious chief surgeon. It was a bitter irony, Daniel Cross noted from the corner, still seated beside Emily. The commander ignored the fallen man completely. His focus shifted, precise and unyielding. At a ward, Daniel and his daughter. The storm had arrived. The moment Dr. Marcus Ewell collapsed, the hospital erupted into chaos. Administrators whispered in frantic tones, nurses froze mid-step, and patients craned their necks to see what had just unfolded. But the man in the crimson cloak didn't spare the fallen surgeon a glance. He moved forward with the inevitability of a storm tide, his guards spreading out behind him. Their black armor gleaming under the fluorescent lights, Daniel Cross rose unsteadily from his chair beside Emily's gurney. For a soldier who had faced death 100 times, he suddenly felt small, like a recruit standing before his general once more. The Supreme Commander's presence had that effect. Every decorated veteran who had ever served under him knew it. He didn't command through fear alone, but through the crushing weight of certainty. When he arrived, you knew the fight was already won. "Captain Cross," the commander said, his tone softer now, still carrying that undercurrent of authority that could silence a room. Daniel snapped to attention instinctively, his battered body struggling to mimic the salute he hadn't performed in years. "Commander," his voice cracked with equal parts exhaustion and reverence. The commander stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Stand down. You've carried enough wars on your back. Let me carry this one." Daniel swallowed hard, words failing him. He had not expected the man himself to come. He thought him most a liaison, a unit, maybe some bureaucratic strings pulled behind closed doors. But this, the Supreme Commander of the Terran Federation, here in person, standing over his daughter, it was almost too much to process. The commander raised a hand. Medics. From the black transports outside, they came. Elite Federation field surgeons, clad in black and gold medical scrubs. Moved with the speed of soldiers and the precision of machines. They pushed sleek cases of equipment that unfolded into mobile surgical stations, glowing with sterile blue light. Autonomous drones hovered around them, spraying antiseptics and sealing off the area. Within moments, the corner of the hospital where Emily lay was transformed into a military-grade operating theater, the likes of which most civilian hospitals couldn't even dream of. The nurses and doctors of the hospital stood frozen, their mouths agape as they watched technology generations ahead of their own spring to life. The contrast was brutal. Where they had seen limitations, the Federation saw solutions. Where they had cited policies, the Federation brought action. Emily's weak eyes fluttered open at the sudden activity. She looked up at the towering figure of the Supreme Commander, her small hand reaching toward him instinctively. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. The commander crouched beside her gurney, his immense presence softening in an instant. His crimson cloak pooled on the floor as he leaned close, his voice gentle, steady. "A friend of your father's. I came to make sure you get better, little one." Her lips curled in the faintest of smiles before exhaustion pulled her eyelids closed again. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to thank him, to pour out every ounce of gratitude burning in his chest, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he gripped the commander's arm, his calloused hand trembling. "Your daughter," the commander said firmly, "is Federation's daughter now, and we do not abandon our own." With that, the medics went to work. Their instruments hummed softly, their movements synchronized like a well-drilled combat unit. They connected Emily to advanced life support, scanning her condition in seconds, mapping her failing heart with holographic projections. One of them turned to the commander, giving a crisp nod. "She'll survive, sir. We'll have to operate immediately, but we have everything we need." The commander simply nodded once. "Do it." Daniel sank back into his chair, his entire body trembling with relief and disbelief. Just hours ago, he had been staring into the abyss of hopelessness, ready to lose the most precious thing in his world. Now, salvation had arrived, not in the form of mercy from the hospital, but in the ironclad promise of the Federation itself. Around them, the hospital staff looked on in stunned silence. Some whispered, others simply stood pale and shaking. They knew what this meant. This was no mere intervention. This was a statement to declaration. The Federation had just reminded them in the most public way possible where true loyalty lay. Daniel bowed his head, his voice breaking as he whispered to the commander. "Thank you." The man placed a hand on his shoulder once more, his grip steady as steel. "No, Captain. Thank you. This is the least humanity owes you." And with that, the surgery began. For the first time in hours, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. The surgery took hours. To Daniel Cross, each passing minute stretched into eternity. He sat rigid in a chair outside the temporary operating ward, his scarred hands gripping one another so tightly that the knuckles had gone white. He had faced sieges that lasted weeks, firefights that stretched through sleepless nights, but nothing compared to the agony of waiting while strangers worked to save his daughter's life through the glass partition. He caught glimpses of the Federation medics as they moved like shadows around Emily's small form. Their instruments glowed with soft light, their hands precise and unshaking. Machines whispered and beeped in harmony, mapping, repairing, and stabilizing. Daniel couldn't understand most of what he said was technology years beyond what civilian hospitals had access to. But he could read the body language of soldiers in motion. These men and women weren't experimenting. They were executing. They knew exactly what they were doing. At last, the door hissed open, and one of the lead surgeons stepped out. His expression was calm, professional, but Daniel could see it in his eyes before the words even left his lips. "Relief, she live," the surgeon said firmly. "The defect is corrected. Her heart is stronger now than it's ever been. She'll need rest, but the danger is gone." Daniel sagged back into his chair, his head falling into his hands as the tears finally broke free. He hadn't cried when he was shot, hadn't cried when friends died beside him in alien mud. But now he wept openly, the sound raw and unrestrained. His little girl, as Emily, was safe. A soft cough drew his attention. The Supreme Commander stood a few paces away, watching with an expression that was unreadable to most. But Daniel thought he caught a flicker of something human in those steel-hard eyes. A man who had seen too many funerals, too many children left fatherless by wars. Perhaps saving one life, just one, was a rare moment of light in a life defined by shadow. "She's sleeping peacefully now," the commander said, his voice quiet. "You can see her." Daniel rose, still unsteady, and walked into the ward. Emily lay on the bed. Color returned to her cheeks, her breathing slow and steady. A faint smile played on her lips even in sleep. He brushed her hair back gently, whispering, "Daddy's here. You're safe now." For the first time in days, he felt the crushing weight in his chest lift. When he stepped out again, the commander was waiting. Together they walked through the hospital corridor. Staff members pressed themselves against the walls, their eyes wide with fear. Whispers rippled through the building, rumors that the Federation was taking over, that the commander himself had come to bring judgment. In the lobby, the administrators huddled together, pale and shaking. The board members who had so confidently cited policy just hours before now looked like defendants awaiting sentencing. The commander stopped, his cloak brushing the tiles, and turned to face them. "Today," he said, his voice carrying like a battle order, "this hospital denied care to the daughter of a decorated Federation veteran. Not because the care was impossible, not because the resources were lacking, but because she lacked the right form of payment." His gaze swept across the trembling faces, pinning each of them in place. "This is not just policy. It is betrayal." A hush fell over the crowd. No one dared to breathe. The commander continued, his tone cutting like steel. "From this day forward, no veteran, and no child of a veteran, will ever be denied life-saving care on this world, or any world under the Federation's banner. You will amend your policies. You will remember who bled for your comfort, who fought for your safety, or you will find yourselves without licenses, without careers, without futures." The administrators nodded frantically, some nearly collapsing under the weight of his words. They knew he wasn't making idle threats. This man commanded fleets. His word was law. Daniel stood silently nearby, watching the scene with awe. He had always known the commander was a force to be reckoned with, but to see him bend an entire institution with nothing but words was staggering. At last, the commander turned back to him. "Your daughter lives because you fought for her, Captain. You called when you were meant to. Do not ever see that as weakness." Daniel straightened, meeting his eyes. "I thought I was out of battle, sir, but I was wrong." The commander allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "We never stop fighting. Not for family." With that, he turned and strode out of the hospital, his guards forming up around him. The transports roared to life, carrying him back into the wider world of duty and war. But his words lingered in the air, like an oath carved in stone. "We take care of our own. Always." Daniel returned to Emily's side, her small hand curled in his. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of hope settle in his chest. Humanity might be flawed, its institutions corrupt, but when it chose to stand together, when it remembered loyalty and sacrifice, there was no force in the galaxy that could stand against it. And tonight, one little girl's heartbeat was living proof.